The blast from a pistol sounded like a popping balloon and sent chills down my spine. My first thought was, is Blake okay? Did he just get executed? Or was he the one dealing out sudden justice? I quickly raced down the dim and dark hallway, making my way to the stairs, delicately descending them, unable to fight off the anticipation and nerve-wracking worry. I called out to my ally over the walkie. All clear upstairs. What the hell was that? Are you okay? Over. My walkie came to life and crackled back. Affirmative, brother. I'm in the basement. First floor was uninhabited, but the cellar wasn't. The lone surviving scumbag decided to be a coward and off himself, Blake answered. Finally, breathing a sigh of relief that the death-dealing dogfight was over, I made my way through the living room and into the kitchen, where the door to the basement was located. Plunging down the steps, I caught sight of Blake, kneeling over the body of the deceased delinquent. He was checking for a pulse when he turned, shaking his head to me, indicating there wasn't one. The goon had succumbed to a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his temple. A pool of scarlet-red fluid flooded the cold concrete floor. And for tonight, I hope the bloodshed and battle was over. Even if that was the case, I knew it wouldn't be long before we encountered another ruthless, menacing, and unpredictable posse of gunmen. The truth was, the longer you survived the catastrophic collapse of society, anyone still persisting and enduring the treacherous conditions was going to be extremely dangerous, desperate, and barbaric. Everyone you came across was a threat to your livelihood and safety. Did you see the accumulations of provisions they had upstairs? I asked Blake. I did, he answered back. We both showed up on foot and there was no way we could salvage all the supplies tonight. Let's recover all the weapons, ammunition, and fall back home to base. We'll return at daylight to retrieve the remaining reserves. The last prevailing plunderer who laid before us had put himself to death with a handgun, a Beretta chambered in 9mm. You better let your wife know we're okay, I uttered to Blake. Yeah, you're right. She's probably worried sick, he replied. As he reached for his radio, I reminded him what a strong and brave spouse she was. I was proud and took great satisfaction in knowing she was part of our Grid Down gang. When the lights go out and the world turns to absolute shit, you're only as strong and secure as the ones you surround yourself with. Unless you were completely bunkered in with a plethora of preps at a location which the depths and dangers of doomsday would never discover, the lone wolf wasn't going to live long in this new dystopian world. The two of us exited the house and rescued an ample amount of boomsticks that included 2 pistols, the Beretta and the 1911, a Mossberg 590 Shockwave, a Keltec KS7, a Henry Classic lever-action rifle chambered in .22, and various boxes of ammo, totaling less than 100 rounds. We were amassing quite the collection of firearms, but the amount of ammo we had stockpiled was just a high priority as food, water, and medicine was. When the roving hordes of heinous monsters showed up, you better have the rounds available to repel and overpower the attack. I hoped the skirmish and the sound of gunshots would scare off any potential scavengers and adversaries who would stumble upon the honey hole of food we were leaving behind until morning. We were in much better shape after discovering the root cellar and bagging some venison, but those rations wouldn't last forever. We couldn't just pull up to the grocery store to replenish our calorie-deficient, battle-tested bodies. It was a difficult and disheartening walk home, especially for Blake. His neighbors had joined his daughter, suffering the same fate, being violently and maliciously murdered by a roving pack of opportunistic vultures. Less than a month into the crumbling and disintegrating civilization, we had already encountered 2 terrorizing, homicidal, and callous cliques, and this was somewhat of a small town. It was unfathomable to imagine what big cities like New York looked like, with a population of 8+ million. Your chances of survival there were stacked against you. Enduring in the concrete jungle of death would be almost impossible. The warmer temps from earlier were now replaced with bone-chilling and bitter wind chills. My body, and more specifically my face, was battered and aching from the hand-to-hand combat and brawl from earlier in the day. I hadn't slept in days since before the feral dog attack that had taken Jody's life. My mind, body, and soul were fast approaching empty. I swear, if the world we were living in wasn't so treacherous, I could sleep for days. I could feel the lumps and knots forming on my face as the cold air collided with it. I was just grateful to be able to see another day. So many others were not as fortunate as me, whether they contracted a life-changing condition, fell victim to starvation or hypothermia, or worse yet, encountered a ghastly group of demons. The number of dead was no doubt growing substantially. Not wanting to burden Blake, I wondered to myself if we were lucky enough to survive the harsh and ruthless Western New York winter, how many wouldn't? By spring, the rotting stench of dead corpses would surely be overpowering. Not just human bodies, but the rancid decay of once domesticated pets and wild animals too. We were fast approaching his house, and after a long, difficult day, it was a sight for sore eyes. Jennifer raced out of the front door, greeting us both with a welcoming and warm embrace. "How's Jim?" Blake asked. "I'm worried," Jennifer responded. "He's sleeping currently, but he's been sweating profusely, and his skin color is very pale." I had no idea yet that he had been bitten by one of the ferocious and feral hellhounds. Perplexed by the conversation, I asked, "What's going on?" "I didn't want to trouble you after pulling through our latest deadly duel, but Jim was bitten sometime during the dog attack on his calf." "Jennifer and I noticed him limping and favoring his leg and confronted him," Blake answered. "The wound looked pretty bad, possibly infected. She cleaned it the best she could, but I fear he may be in desperate need of medication, specifically antibiotics." We had just lost Jody, and I couldn't fathom losing Jimmy too. "I bet that's why he was digging that second grave," I called out. He knew either an infection, or worse yet, a rabies diagnosis, was a certain death sentence. "Let's get inside and unload this haul of lethal weapons." Blake and I laid the guns we had acquired down on the kitchen table. While he filled his wife in on our dicey and deadly adventure, I turned my attention to my downstairs neighbor. He was sprawled out and positioned on the couch, dormant and resting, while the fireplace roared with hot embers. Jennifer was right. The burning candles illuminated his features and revealed the washed-out color in his face. Puddles of perspiration poured down from his thinning hairline. The bandage that Jennifer had placed over the wound was already saturated and sopping with blood. Worn out and obviously fatigued from everything he'd been through, including, shockingly, losing the love of his life, his girlfriend, Jimmy didn't even feel me removing the dressing and gauze that covered the grotesque and stomach-turning mutilation. Upon closer examination, the radiance of my flashlight divulged 4 extensive and profound punctures that were still bleeding uncontrollably. The red liquid was discolored with a mix of thick, yellowish-white fluid that I assumed was pus, indicating his body was already fighting an infection. The microorganisms of bacteria from the dog's bite were already entering his exhausted body. His entire calf was red with blisters and had swollen up significantly. Without question, it was clearly infected, which could possibly lead to staph infections and strep infections, both serious and potential fatal conditions during normal times. What we were currently existing in was anything but normal. There was no hospital, urgent care, or doctor to race him to. All we could do was to keep it clean and attempt to track down some life-saving medication, or I feared we'd be burying him next to Jody eventually. I summoned both Blake and Jennifer over to discuss Jimmy's grave and dire condition. They could see the look of concern in my worried and blemished face. I asked Jennifer if she had a thermometer on hand so we could take his temperature. It was obvious he was burning up as the sweat continued streaming and cascading down his grizzled gray face. She quickly returned from the kitchen with the instrument and began scanning his forehead in a left-to-right motion. Seconds later, the ding and beeping indicated the thermostat had finished measuring Jimmy's temperature. 102.7, Jennifer quietly said with trepidation in her voice. The reading confirmed our worst fears. He was in bad shape, and his condition would only continue to deteriorate until we were able to acquire some antibiotics to help fight off the infection. "What are we going to do?" Jennifer asked. "I'm going to go out and find him some medicine," I replied. "You just got back from a deadly battle that could have ended your life. You haven't slept in days, and probably haven't consumed more than a few hundred calories either," Jennifer countered. "We don't have a choice. The longer we wait, the worse his condition is going to get. If that infection continues to progress, we're days away from burying him next to Jody, and our group of what was once 5 will be down to 3. I have to help him," I pronounced. "Where do you plan on finding medicine?" Blake questioned. "I've got 3 locations in mind," I answered. "The Walgreens and the plaza next to the Foodtown grocery store, my burned out apartment, and the Legacy Senior Living Center." "That Walgreens was being looted and vandalized the day after the power went out and the world fell apart," Blake stated with a stern and somber voice. "You think that's a good idea? And how do you know there's anything even left of your apartment building?" "I don't know, but I do know I had 2 bottles of fish amoxicillin there. It's possible the fire faded out before the entire structure was lost. And a ransacked Walgreens pharmacy was a good enough place to start my search as any. You got any better ideas?" I asked. Blake was clearly not on board with my unpredictable and precarious plan. We just fought off a group of ruthless and remorseless savages who were set up just a few houses away. With you gone, you're leaving Jennifer and I vulnerable and at risk if another demonic faction arises. "I don't like this proposal of yours, but I can't stop you. And if you run into trouble, which is almost a certainty in this sick society we are surviving in, I can't guarantee I can abandon my wife, leaving her alone and exposed to the evils of doomsday to rescue you. You understand you're going to be on your own, right?" Blake muttered. "Copy that," I acknowledged. "I tell you what, Blake, I'm going to grab some grub and a few hours of sleep, and come daybreak, you and I will salvage the reserves of provisions we left behind tonight before I set out on my expedition in hopes of preserving Jimmy's life." I walked past both Blake and Jennifer and retrieved a can of raviolis from the unlit kitchen that were actually 3 months past their expiration date, cracked the tin with a manual can opener before returning to the living room and placing the container next to the fire as I fought to keep my sleepy and dreary eyes open.